Okay, I believe this is where I left off in my digital painting of Desmond Tutu, all stuffed silly with socks. And it's very colorful. It's influenced by some of these stylistic influences I found, like all these different socks, these different patterns, these different bright colors, as well as by at least 2 different photo references of the man himself. And so now if all my digital painting is done, or at least I think it's done, and I can see, let's just review quickly the layers that build that up, right? It all starts with pretty basic flat painting with 100% opacity. Remember, we customized a brush. So I always make my own brushes for each new project. Just to get a slightly different feel to adapt to, just like you would when you're using a brush in real life. So I set my brush at 1000 by 1000 pixels, just paint it with black and erase, or paint with black and pure white, and make a brush at a 45-degree angle that's slightly oval. That works for me. Then I go to Edit and Define Brush Preset, and then I use brush settings. And the only thing I really adapt is the shape dynamics of the brush. So if I show you that, the shape dynamics I like to have a little bit of size jitter. I always control the size with the pin pressure, so it can go thicker with more pressure. I increase the minimum diameter just a little bit, so we're never getting down to just 1 or 2 pixels with a light touch. And I definitely change the angle jitter. And that's how it's so different than just a round brush, because you'll get those different textures at the edges. I'll increase the roundness a little bit. That kind of thins it out and gives you a little bit more space in each stroke. And yeah, and that's basically what I do to create my own custom brushes, which then allows you with a tablet to be a lot more expressive. And that is usually what I'm trying to do whenever I'm doing a digital painting. Be able to capture my personality and my hand in the technique. So now that I've done a lot of my painting, let's see what those steps are. On top of my speed sketch layer that was at 100%, I did refine paint layers, right? And those were at a slightly lower opacity, and they helped to kind of blend together everything. Then more and more refined, and I composited in some glasses that I painted on top of, right? So this is what I would call, even though the colors are really out there, that's a pretty representational version of Desmond Tutu here. You know, pretty straightforward, nothing crazy yet. And then, remember I mapped that photo on top of him to kind of match my proportions a little bit, so let me push that up. So I take that photo, I push it up to 100%, right? Even though I'm working off of 2 different photo references to get his likeness. What I can use this photo for, which has nothing to do with the actual paint strokes, is I can actually use it to adjust my colors slightly. So this is a layer style where we can use it to affect the colors of everything underneath. So once Photoshop catches up with me, I can show you that. So there are different ways you can play with your painting. Why all these turned back on? I'll be showing you those in a second. And at the end of the day, no matter how you digitally painted it, you want to get kind of an overall finish to it. And this is the overall finish I ended up with after working with it. So I want to show you some of the thinking that goes into it and some of the kind of background steps. For some reason, Photoshop is being weird. All right, there we go. So that's just the refined paint layer on top of my speed sketch layer with the glasses composited in and painted on. And then you have this photo of him on top, right? Now if I take that photo layer and I scroll down in the layer styles to color, notice that no matter how I painted, it will swap my colors for the colors of the photo, which is an interesting way to kind of see if your painting matches, right? And you can see his eye's pretty messed up there. Now, if I take the opacity down on that, I can use that to modify my colors a little bit. So instead of being 0% with those crazy colors, I can just use those photo colors to blend into my colors a little bit for something even more representational. So that eye still really looks messed up. And then I started compositing in socks. Kind of weird groupings of socks, right? And on one of the stuffed silly with socks, then I started painting over the socks, right? And on one of those socks layers, I fixed some of the issues with the face as well. So in this layer. And then I started combining layers together. And end up with a pretty solid finished painting. Now, this actually works pretty well. This I like as a finish, and I think I might actually save this one. What's so great about digital art is you can get so many varieties, and I might even take the colors of the photograph and take them down to a little less, because I like all the color. So maybe let's do like only 36% of the photo colors. Maybe a little bit more. Let's go 41. Yeah, there we go. So now what I might do is take this and save it as a version. And you might do this for yours. Of course, your PSD version of your painting will have all of these potentials, all of these different options. Mine I'm going to save to the desktop. I'm going to call this representational version 1. Right. And then I could, if I wanted, take off all the socks. For the most part, all the composited socks. And call that version 2, right? Okay. Now, what does it mean for something to have finish for a digital painting? So that means when you zoom in on it to at least print resolution, right? So you can view it at 100%. That the texture of the paint feels fulfilling. It doesn't feel just like one layer, like there's some depth to it. And the compositing helped that. The different lower opacity refined painting helps that. So even though this isn't going to fool anyone, it looks like digital painting, it still shows that there's a lot of care and finish to each part of it. And that one area doesn't look completely unfinished compared to another area. So that's the kind of finish we want to have. So that's what I've got there. Other types of finish might mean you don't want it to be quite so representational. You might want it to be abstracted. So one way you could do that is to play with CMYK separations. So I took this painting and then I ran it through my CMYK separations, right? And I got these layers. And this is pretty crazy looking, especially because it's all based on digital painting, right? And it's all offset. You see how crazy the yellow and the blue are from each other. And then I brought those layers back on top of my painting, and this is just playing with it and turn them on into a CMYK layer. And then I put a layer of white between them to dull it out a little bit. Then I composited in a little bit more of the socks. And then I used a combined layer that blocked out with screen mode some of my painting layers. So actually kind of intentionally taking away some of the paint so that the socks come out a little bit more. And I decided I liked this finish quite a bit. So intentionally less finished, but also with these little examples of the CMYK dots coming through underneath, kind of tying everything together. So these are some of the games you can play with digital painting, which are a lot of fun. And that felt kind of looser and freer, and I wanted this to be joyful and silly, right? So then, how can you get to an even better paint finish that doesn't look so digital, right? Because I've got the halftone dots kind of showing through, but otherwise it just looks like my brush and pixels. So what you can do is you can start to composite texture fills, right? So I started to do that. I've got a lot of watercolor texture fills. Let me see if I can show them to you. I saved them to a folder for assignment 9. And you might want to do this for your finish. Now, assignment 9, this is just to get you exposed to digital painting. You're not required to have a beautifully finished painting, right? But this is to show you this skill so that you can use it on your final project, which is graded by the class. And that you do want to have a full finish. So these different textures, just these watercolors, I am now going to overlay as texture fills on top. So this I use soft light at 24%. Barely makes a difference, but it makes some. This one I use soft light at 24%, and I layered that up, and it makes some difference that the computer is slow to show. This, I use soft light at 12%, and I warmed it up, and this, I used screen at 23%, and each of them give a little bit more depth to the actual paint surface. So you'll get that kind of cloudiness of watercolor coming in now. And you can decide how much you want to do that. You can put kind of a canvas texture overlay on top of it, all kinds of things. Okay, so then, come on, Photoshop, keep up with me. This is just showing you what I decided. Then I turned on a gray background just to see what the overall shape was. And then I merged everything together from those previous layers and got that. And then I did a duplicate of it and put it on top. And on that duplicate, what I often do is I say image auto tone. And then I set that to overlay mode and then take its opacity way down. Because when you auto tone, it will really enhance your contrast. And then you decide how much of that you want to use. And so this is how I got my final finish for my portrait. Now, in order to be able to finish it off, and that's it with a white background, which is the intention. In order to be able to finish it off, you have to be able to know what you're aiming for. So if I open up this version, which is before all of that CMYK kind of noodling, try to open it in preview just so we can compare the two. You'll see that the level of finish is pretty subjective. Come on. There we go. So both of these have a level of finish, right? But the problem I had with this is that some of it looks too composited still. Some of it looks integrated, but then other parts look less than finished. So you can finish off in a few ways. You can intentionally kind of undo things. And you can work with it until you're happy with its overall appearance. So I would call